but my name is Alex Moyet, and I'm currently the marketing director of Curve Digital, one of the world's biggest indie publishers. Before I start, I'd just really like to thank the DevGAMM team for organizing a really brilliant event and for inviting me to talk to you today about one of my very favorite topics, which is video game marketing. So before diving in, I just wanted to give you a little overview of my experience as a bit of background for the talk. So as already mentioned, I first started my career working on the European advertising account for Xbox, where I helped create marketing campaigns for a variety of first-party games and services. I then moved on to PlayStation, where I was privileged enough to work as a product manager for some of my very favorite game studios, including Media Molecule, Naughty Dog, and Guerrilla Games. After a few years at Sony, I was recruited to work in-house at Media Molecule as a commercial strategist, and then I set up my own consultancy. And for the past 6 months, I've been the marketing director at Curve Digital. So over my career, I've been fortunate enough to work with over 30 different game studios, AAA and indie, across everything from console to mobile, PC, and VR. And I've seen firsthand how increasingly difficult it's becoming for everyone to get significant attention for their games. The competition presented by the sheer number of titles being published each week, particularly on PC, is getting bigger and bigger. Marketing budgets are getting smaller, and I'm sure you find it just as frustrating as I do that amazing games get lost in this noise. Everyone in this room, I'm sure, will have at some point in their careers, or if not, they might in some point work on a product that didn't do as well commercially as they would have hoped. And as much as we'd all love the games market to be a complete meritocracy, good Metacritic scores, good review scores don't always equal good sales. So being able to market your games effectively has never been more important. Video game marketing in 2017 means budgets are smaller, competition is higher, and consumers' attention is being pulled in more directions than ever before. And I'm sure you'll have seen the next slide or something very similar to it, which is an overview of the quantity of titles published on Steam in the last 10 years. And as you can see, almost 7,000 different titles, that's excluding DLC, that's excluding product add-ons, have already been published so far this year. And this growth shows little sign of slowing thanks to the advancement of more accessible games-making tools and software. In short, the job of video game marketing has never been more difficult. And this isn't just limited to PC and mobile. Discoverability is becoming increasingly difficult on console, especially for non-AAA games. So, onto this talk. My main objective for this talk is to guide you through the principles of video game marketing, offering tips on how to optimize your output along the way. So to do that, I'd like to start with the 5 basic principles of any marketing strategy. If we're being extremely reductive, any video game marketing campaign boils down to 5 key elements. 1, what is the most unique or interesting thing about your game? Who is your target audience? Where you can reach this audience? And finally, when and how to tell this audience about your game to convince them to buy it, play it, share it, talk about it, keep spending, whatever your particular objectives might be. So let's start with the what. What are your game's key features and what is its USP? So for those of you who have engaged in writing formal marketing plans before, you'll know that the standard beginning point is formal and in-depth product analysis, but this shouldn't just stop with defining a few key features. Some of the biggest value that the marketeer can add is not just being able to condense what can be a 5, 10, 20, 30-hour experience into 4 or 5 bullet points, but also knowing exactly which features to select to message your game. Oftentimes, you'll see people using the exact key features of the game as their marketing messages, but just because something is a core design feature of your game doesn't mean it's going to be clear, interesting, or even appealing for your target audiences. There is definitely a lot of overlap, but being able to take the key components of a game and channel these into consumer-focused messages and talking points is one of the biggest challenges for the marketing team. And one example I'd like to use is one of the most recent campaigns that I worked on, which was for a PC game called Bomber Crew, which came out in October. We broke even in 36 hours. We generated $1 million in revenue in 2 weeks, and it continues to break all of our internal records. So one of the core components of the game design document was a unique crew with procedurally generated names, skills, talents, and backstories, which isn't necessarily exciting when you just write that on a page. So when drawing up the communications pillars of the game, I pivoted this to an emotional attachment to the crew, as this was not only more interesting, but also a unique point of difference from other similar war simulators, which focus much more on the equipment and the combat than the crew behind them. And finally, have a clear selling point. We often talk about having a unique selling point, but as I'm sure you'll have experienced, this is so difficult in the games category as it is so saturated. But if you can find one clear selling point to anchor your marketing campaign around, as well as giving consumers something to latch onto, that's really going to help your marketing materials. So now on to who is your target audience, or rather your target audiences? Because essentially, and this is something that is often overlooked by game development teams, is that there is no such thing as a homogeneous target audience, all identically into the same things. Everyone's got various interests, and there are plenty of people who wouldn't consider gaming their primary interest, but still absolutely own a PC or console and play and enjoy video games. So consider the features or themes of your games. If it's a racing game, it could be just as fruitful to market your game to car enthusiasts and motoring magazines as to traditional racing gamers. Or, for example, if you're making a cooking game, you could try and promote the game with food bloggers interested in tech. As long as these audiences are open to buying and playing games on your chosen platform, then targeting different audiences, even with completely different assets and messaging, is a really solid strategy. And again, to put that into the context of Bomber Crew, we had the primary target audience of fans of key war game franchises such as War Thunder, fans of PC strategy sim games such as FTL, but our secondary audience was World War II aficionados who also own a PC, ensuring we'd be targeting not only fans of the genre and similar titles, but also fans of military history. And knowing this, we were able to tailor our messaging accordingly and also ensure we were reaching out to the right press, streamers, and influencers across all of these groups. So yeah, there is no such thing as one homogeneous target audience. So let's consider some strategies to reach where your audience is. As we've just discussed, there is no one target audience, and as such, there cannot be one perfect channel to use your messages to find and communicate with your audience. I'm often asked what the best channel is to invest in, and the short answer is you need a solid and well thought out blend of paid, owned, and earned media channels in order to ensure you're building up a community prior to launch. It is, however, really very critical not to overstretch yourself, not just in terms of spreading budgets too thin, where you're spending a tiny bit of money everywhere, but also in terms of the physical time that you have to invest in these channels. And ultimately, that means the content that you have to support those channels. You should only be present on channels you have the time and the resource to support. And this is particularly true for social media, which is a key part of any PC or console marketing plan from indie to AAA. If you're a small studio and you've only got a few hours a week to work on your social media channels, for instance, pick one channel and do your best to grow your community on there, rather than dividing your time between 3 or 4 channels and you're not being particularly impactful in any of them. Also, make sure that you're choosing your channels with a clear view of their demographics and with a full consideration of the content you'll want to produce to be effective, and not just the channels that you personally use or personally prefer. Don't make the mistake of thinking that what works on Facebook or Instagram will also be the same on Twitter or Snapchat. All social channels, as with all non-social channels, have different audiences, different ways to engage with the community, and content that does better than others. So do be selective and don't overstretch yourself, because it will be a waste of your time and ultimately a waste of your money. And another key piece of advice that I usually give, within reason, you can put yourself out there and see what sticks. As long as you're not doing anything offensive or illegal, try not to. There is no harm in in making experiments with new channels, with new content ideas. But do make sure that you're constantly monitoring, analyzing, and most importantly, applying these learnings to your future work to ensure the best return on investment. So, back to points 4 and 5. When to engage your audiences and how to get your messaging across. A key part of when and how you're going to be able to find and communicate with your target audiences will be your release timings and your campaign budgets. So release timings. The announcement and release timings for your game, they're often dictated by external forces, such as publisher or platform deadlines. For example, maybe you're working on a launch title ready for a new console, and that's definitely not going to move anytime soon. but more often than not, you will have a bit of flexibility when it comes to choosing when to release your game. And particularly if you have a limited or even no marketing budget, it can seem like there's absolutely never an ideal window to release your game. And that's probably true if you're looking at anything from September to December. But there are certainly worse weeks than others, and your decision would usually depend on what other games are due for release, or indeed thinking about any other big cultural, national, international entertainment events coming up that could sink your players' time and money, as well as the space for games media and influencers to cover your launch. So once you've found your ideal release date, work backwards to your announcement date. I'm often asked what the ideal length for a video game marketing campaign is, and whilst the real answer is far from short and fast, the general rule should be only leave as much room as you can maintain consumer interest, which usually translates to how much content you have to reveal about your game. If you're working on a very short 1 hour, 2 hour, single player, narrative-led experience, it's going to be really difficult to keep talking about your product without producing either spoilers or consumer fatigue, where players no longer feel like they actually need to buy and play the game in order to experience it. Conversely, if you're working on a AAA console game or anything with multiplayer, you'll really need a much more time, a lot more adequate time to build up that community and platform support prior to launch. So really think about exactly what your game is, exactly what you want to reveal and can reveal, and make sure that release window and the announcement window fits accordingly. So let's talk marketing budgets. As a general industry rule of thumb, and this obviously changes depending on the total budget of your game, about 10 to 15% of the total cost of developing the game should be spent on marketing. And there are, of course, a few examples of games that have sold extremely well without any traditional marketing spend. PUBG, Minecraft's original release, puzzle series The Room are some very good examples, but they are examples, they're exceptions, and they're not the rule. So whatever budget you do have, do make sure you put some aside for marketing, as this can be what makes or breaks the success of your game. So where should you spend your money? Obviously, every marketing campaign is unique. As such, every budget needs to be completely unique and tailored. But let's just look at one way to hypothetically split a budget of $50,000. Now, whilst you can expect the majority of the marketing budget to go on paid-for media, in this example, half, it is essential to invest early on in good marketing assets, specifically your key art and your trailers. If you are going to spend any money, even if you're not putting it into paid-for media, these are the two assets you should be concentrating on, your key art and your trailers. If your branding is unappealing, if your logo is unappealing, if your first trailer is unappealing, it will impact the success of your game, the success of your campaign. So getting those basics right, and it sounds very obvious, but getting them right and investing on them early is very key. Now, AAA studios, bigger publishers, they have dedicated teams and often years of time and lots of money to create extensive suites of assets. But regardless of how many assets you're creating, and whether you're making them in-house or outsourcing to design and video agencies, it is so vital to make the most of everything you create. So for example, if you've got budget for just one trailer, that's fine. One trailer can be used and reused in a variety of different ways. From that one asset, you have stills, GIFs, teasers, cut downs for social media. You can update it again with press quotes or player reactions for another post-launch beat. Regardless of how much money you're spending, whether it's nothing or 3 million, 10 million, use your budget efficiently. Onto events. I think events is often a common question. Obviously, we're at one now. Is it right to be at events? Is it, because sometimes, especially for smaller developers, it can be a huge amount of money compared to what they've got. But preferably, if you can go to an event where you have a good access of press and interested consumers, that can be really effective. And finally, something in this example that I personally like to do is I like to hold back 10% of my marketing budget for contingency. And that isn't just in case I completely miscount all the numbers and get everything wrong, although that is a handy safety net. That is because opportunities that you haven't budgeted for always present themselves. There's always one event that's come up last minute. There's always a tactical opportunity. There's always a streamer that you meet or equipment you need to buy or flights you need to cover. So I think it's always really sensible at the beginning to hold some money back because you will inevitably need it for something later on down the line. So with my time nearly at an end, I would just summarize those key points. Once you understand your game, who you'll be targeting it towards, what you're saying to your audience as well as how, congratulations, you can actually start doing the marketing. And if that sounds like a lot of work before you've done anything, it is and it should be. When it comes to marketing, planning and preparation is everything. And the better researched and targeted your plans and timings, the more you analyze the results of your work for future improvement, the more effective it's going to be, guaranteed. So that's just a very, very quick guide. I've only got half an hour talking about planning optimization for PC and console. But before I go to Q&A, I'd like to give my top 2 underrated marketing tips for breaking through the noise and making your mark with gaming audiences on these platforms. So my first tip is invest in community. And in video games and video game marketing, we talk about community so often that the term itself becomes a bit meaningless. Community management isn't really integrated as much as it should be into the central marketing planning, and often not really given the credit it deserves in a lot of cases. But it goes without saying that any social community, online or offline, needs to be maintained. And once you start building those conversations, you have to be active, you have to be interesting, and more importantly, be interested. And one of the best examples of this right now on social media is an indie title called Ooblets. I don't know if anyone's seen it. If you haven't heard of it, it's kind of a cross between Animal Crossing and Pokemon. But it's generating a huge amount of hype for a title of its size because they're doing a great job of content generation and building engagement with their community. But whilst it's absolutely essential to build and show your appreciation for the community as a whole, the best community managers spend a lot of time identifying and building relationships with specific individuals. These active and influential community members, in turn, help generate a huge amount of engagement with your game. And there are a lot of ways you can show your appreciation and build relationships with them for free. So on the more obvious end of the scale, you have obviously respond to any social media messages or fan mail. Maybe you've sent out bits of merchandise in the past. But engaging with your community and those key members in a much more personal way can prove a huge bang for buck. So some examples. Consider inviting your most loyal community members for a tour of your studio or your working space. Jump on a quick Skype call for a friendly Q&A for those fans that you can't meet with physically. If you've got a spare ticket to an event like PAX, E3, DevGAMM, invite a fan to join you on your booth. You can put the names of your biggest supporters in your game credits. So those are just some free, quick examples, but they're all really good examples of those money can't buy experiences that will reward and nurture your community and help generate conversation as well as goodwill. And my final tip, and this is potentially the biggest opportunity to grow your audience, even with no budget, and that is cross-promotion. And I can guarantee that every single one of you here is working, or eventually will be working, with a larger partner in some form or other. PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, Facebook, Steam, Apple, Google, Amazon, Unity, Unreal, Autodesk, Samsung, HTC, Oculus. The list is literally endless. And all of these brands have their own marketing teams, 100% tasked with working with developers and their games to promote their own brands and services. They will be surely looking for the best content regardless, but if you can find ways and exemplify ways in which your game benefits their business objectives, you're much more likely to get support from their channels. So, for example, maybe you're making an addictive group couch co-op game that could help hardware teams sell additional controllers. Or perhaps you're making an educational or social game that can help platform holders grow and expand their install bases beyond just traditional gamers. Those are just 2 quick examples. But if you do anything today, if you do anything in your marketing campaigns, have a think about the additional roles that your game could play in the wider business objectives of your partners and how you can help each other. And if you're not sure what their objectives are, read and watch their latest presentations, go on their websites, find people if you can on LinkedIn, gain some insight. And finally, depending on the title that you're working on, what country you're working from, there may be endless local opportunities to take advantage of. You just have to start having these discussions, having a look. It really costs nothing, apart from your time, but the return is potentially massive, especially if you have little to no marketing budget. So that's my time pretty much up. Hopefully you found this very short session a useful guide for building your PC and console marketing plans. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. You've been really attentive, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Round of applause. Guys, we have a few minutes Maybe two short questions. Welcome to the microphone. Use your DevGAMM app correctly and vote. Alex, I think I'll ask you one question about to support indies. We have many indies in DevGAMM. Maybe three first steps to tiny indie team with no budget for marketing and no marketing guy or girl in a team.
3 steps. Well, first of all, have a really clear brand identity. That is something, imagery, logos, you can create those in-house. Have, as I mentioned before, you're a small team, have one social channel where you're very active. And really everything is content. And I think go back to Ooblets as a good example. Every time the creators update a feature, they create a feature, even if they have a glitch or something go wrong, they show it. They have very open game development. And that is something that people are really interested in. So have a clear brand identity that you can create yourself and treat every single thing that you're doing as potential marketing assets, because there are a lot of people out there, a lot of hashtags out there, a lot of conversations that you can jump on for no money. Start building your community there.
Okay, Ooblets looks really great. And what do you think then the tiny team should start marketing? In pre-production to study on in...
Oh gosh, start marketing as soon as you've decided you're making a game. That's when you start marketing. As I mentioned before, when you start talking about your game can be a different thing. You can start making a game and not talk about it for years if you really want to. The important thing is that you're getting that time between announcement and launch completely right. And again, that goes back to how much content you want to share, you're willing to share. Back to Ooblets, they've been showing game features for a couple of years because they're approached very much as an open game development for their marketing assets. But they have a lot of content to show. It's a very big world they're creating. There are lots of interesting characters. So there is a lot to talk about. Again, if you're working on a very short narrative game, maybe it's only an hour or 2 to play, I'd keep that window a lot shorter, otherwise you're going to be giving all your game secrets and narrative adventure away.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I think we have no questions. Thank you.
There's one. Got one.
You have a question. Welcome.
Hello and thank you.
Hi.
My name is Teras and I'd like to ask you one question. What was the craziest and maybe the funniest, maybe the most incredible cross promo with a platform and some developer you ever heard about?
Oh gosh, I can't think right now.
First came to your mind.
The first thing that comes to my mind is Fallout and Tinder. I don't know if you have Tinder in Belarus and Russia. It's basically a dating app. They put Pit-Boy. They gave him a dating profile, and you can kind of talk to him on there. That's kind of a good example of cross-promotion with a different social platform. There's probably a bajillion more. I'll get your card afterwards, and I'll send you some examples.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Hello, thank you for the speech. If you were an indie team, what channel would you choose, one channel, to distribute an information about your game, like marketing?
If I had to pick one, I'd probably go with Twitter.
Twitter? Okay. And how would you approach Twitter? What hashtags would you recommend for indie teams, like to start with? For example, Screenshot Saturday is pretty popular, but I would say that it's less efficient as going to the platforms and posting them about game engines, for example.
Yeah.
So what would you...
Screenshot Saturday is a good one. Hashtag game dev, hashtag indie dev, hashtag indie game. But as you mentioned, those platform hashtags are really good as well. So hashtag made in Unity, hashtag UE4 for Unreal Engine. I think just going on the channels that you're using, working back from the technology that you have or the platforms that you're working with, that's a really great place to start. Obviously, if you're working on console games, things like hashtag PS4 or Xbox One, whatever it may be, hashtag Steam, hashtag new release. There's really endless examples. And if you just search at other games, see what they're doing, it's absolutely fine just to take their hashtags and take their learnings, really.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is, how would you approach the way to create animated pictures like GIFs for your game? What would be like the advices for?
The advice would be very much start from the place of what would you find interesting to look at. And I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of I am a game, I am a brand, and I will just talk to people. It's really about having that conversation. So putting out assets that are going to generate conversation. Maybe they're funny, maybe they are interesting, poignant, emotional. Maybe they're just typifying the game development process. I think as long as it's got a unique tone of voice, a unique personality, but also you're acting like a human, you're posting like a person, you're having conversations and getting involved in other people's game development processes as well, not just promoting yourself, is also a really key part. Be part of the community with your game.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.